Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss Nigel Farage's announcement that he's given up trying to get into Westminster, what his stated reasons are, and what it may mean for a Brexit-dominated general election campaign this December. But first, if you'd like notifications of my daily uploads, please click the subscribe button and then the bell notification next to it. So, Nigel Farage has announced that he is not going to stand as a candidate in the Westminster elections in this December. He has stood as a candidate in 7 different Westminster elections, both general elections and by-elections, most notably in 2010, when he was beaten by a man dressed as a dolphin, where none of the major parties were fielding a candidate because it was the seat of the Speaker, John Bercow. He came closest in 2015 whilst leader of UKIP. Now in 2017 he didn't stand because he was busy pretending not to be involved in politics in order to prevent any of the dirt from the Brexit process splashing on his suit like so much milkshake. This was despite him drawing his MEP salary for doing no work and being paid a fortune by prominent Brexiteer Aaron Banks for dubious services rendered. But the second Theresa May's withdrawal agreement looked like it was sunk, Farage started popping up again. He'd left UKIP at this point, so headed up the campaigning with a new group, the Brexit Party, whose systems and funding is still the subject of a great deal of uncertainty. Farage himself is not the leader, but he is its most prominent campaigner. As such, you might be forgiven for thinking he actually was the leader. It's an obvious enough arrangement as campaigning is something he's good at. But in 2019, Farage says he's still not standing, even though he's no longer in hiding. Perhaps it's because he fears the dolphin, or maybe that this time he'll be up against a candidate dressed as a milkshake. Who knows? But his stated reason is that he wants to support all of the 600 Brexit Party candidates. In other words, he's claiming to be acting selflessly for the cause. I don't think so. Now, he and his party did do well in the EU elections in May and was riding very high in the polls after the successful campaign. Now, at the time, Leave supporters thought that a general election could even return a Brexit Party government with Nigel Farage as Prime Minister. This was never on the cards for a few reasons. First of all, Farage doesn't want power. Delivering on the outlandish Brexit promises that he and others made is quite impossible. So he needs to be in a position whereby he can claim that these aims are not being achieved because of the incompetence of those in charge. And he'd totally sort it out if he had power. But at the same time, he has to make sure that he never gets that power. Otherwise, it'd be like, there you go, you've got the power. Sort it out then. The second thing is that people do not vote in the EU elections on the same basis as a general election. Voting records for Farage and UKIP show this clearly. People will vote for those sorts of people and parties in local and EU elections because, well, they don't actually take those elections seriously, unfortunately, in this country. But people who vote in general elections, which is far too few, do tend to take them a bit more seriously. And the third reason is that the Conservatives and the Labour Party were in a complete mess over Brexit. Now, I still don't think either of them have got a good Brexit position, but they have at least shored it up from their non-position that they had for those EU elections. So, in a general election, there was never any real prospect of the Brexit Party sweeping to power in Westminster. However, they could definitely do a lot better than UKIP ever managed, as Brexit has now polarised the nation in a way that it never did before. But this could be very good or very bad for the Remain camp, depending on how they play it. The Brexit Party did very well in the polls, not just the EU elections. When they were campaigning hard, people were saying that they would vote for them in a general election. Now, they've gone into a sort of hiatus at the moment, but if they decide to push their campaigning hard again, it could easily make an impact. You would expect that it would, and they could certainly be returning MPs in December. However, a couple of things have changed. So while Theresa May was making disproportionate concessions to the hard right of her party, Boris Johnson has embraced it completely and chased out prominent moderates. The candidates being fielded by the Conservative Party in this election will have a higher proportion of the swivel-eyed loons than ever before. The aim of this policy of Johnson's was to render the Brexit Party irrelevant. That's what he feared. Boris Johnson is saying that there's no point in voting for the Brexit Party because nobody has a more committed attitude to Brexit than he does. A couple of problems with that. One of which is that means he's abandoning his centre, or the centre, his left, I suppose, and losing support to the Liberal Democrats. The other problem is that Johnson has weakened this impression slightly by failing to deliver the Brexit that he promised was 100% guaranteed. But Johnson has his deal and he's billing it as a hard Brexit at the same time, which it absolutely is. The aim is to appeal to both hard leavers as well as those who want to leave, but only with a deal. To this end, Nigel Farage has had to describe Johnson's Brexit deal as worse than not leaving at all. This is what the Brexiteers have done throughout this process. They say they want to leave, but when a route to leaving is provided, they say, oh no, not that leave, because that's worse than staying. Now, there's nothing wrong with that in itself. Lots of people in the UK have come to that conclusion. Lots of people who voted leave have now looked at what leave is and gone, that's actually really bad. I want to stay now. But the likes of Farage are not saying that. They still claim they want to leave, even though he blew his top when members of the EU were saying that we shouldn't get an extension. In fact, Nigel Farage cried so loudly about wanting an extension that he actually did put off quite a lot of his supporters. But the prospect of the Brexit Party fielding 600 or more candidates would still represent a win for Remain rather than Leave. This is why there is no small amount of acceptance when it was rumoured last week that the Brexit Party would be fielding only about 20 candidates in heavily Leave voting but Labour constituencies. I mean, that would have been a gift to not only Boris Johnson but also the hardline Brexiteers. It's why, well, of course the Brexit Party will do that. That is how they're going to be able to deliver Brexit. You potentially nick some Labour seats, but there's no risk to the Conservative MPs. But Nigel Farage popped up again to demand a pact with Boris Johnson. Johnson has refused, so Farage is now threatening to field 600 candidates in the elections. Now, these may still cost Labour some seats, as Labour are failing to shore up their support with a strong Remain message, so they're losing support from the Brexiteers on the left to the Brexit Party, as well as to the Liberal Democrats in terms of Remainers. But it would be placing far more Conservative Party seats than Labour ones at risk. So imagine the scenario whereby you've got a constituency where the Conservative candidate would, under normal circumstances, get 40% of the vote. Now let's say the next in line is a Labour candidate with 25% of the vote. So the Conservative candidate wins with a hefty majority. And yes, just for those who are confused, you do get a majority with 40% of the vote. That's how it works with first past the post. It's called a majority because you won. But now let's say, and the majority itself is defined as being the difference between how many votes you got and how many the next person got. But now let's say the Brexit Party ride into town and they split the Conservative vote down the middle. So Labour on their 25%, but the Conservative on 20% and the Brexit Party on 20%. That could easily see both parties losing out to Labour. And this could happen all over the country, particularly in England and Wales, with Labour and the Liberal Democrats being the most likely winners in that scenario. So it seemed a sort of madness that the Brexit Party would do this. Now, although I accept that Nigel Farage doesn't really want Brexit because it's easy money being an MEP who doesn't actually do any work for the role. And it's easy for him to justify not doing any work for the role because he's elected specifically not to engage with the EU. Why spoil the ride on the gravy train by taking the UK out of the EU? No, much better to field hundreds of candidates knackering the pro-Brexit Tories and allowing a Remain alliance to emerge in a new parliament. He gets to say he pushed hard for Brexit. I mean, we put 600 candidates in. You can't do more than that. I mean, you could put 650 in, but you know. And he also gets to say he personally acted selflessly in not standing himself so that he could support all of the candidates. But the reality is, that's not what would happen. He'd get to keep riding the gravy train as another referendum is issued and we opt to Remain after all. It's the perfect scenario for him. Years more being paid to say how disgraceful it was that Brexit was stolen by the people who will have twice voted in Parliament opposed to a hard Brexit and even a public referendum opposed to Brexit completely since the 2016 referendum. But just because Farage is saying this doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen. He is famous for saying one thing on one day and the opposite thing the next day. So don't put any store by what he says, put store by what he does. Nigel Farage is not in charge of the Brexit Party. And until the deadlines for registrations, we do not know how many candidates they will actually field or where they will field them. This could all be politics. This could all be threats to get Boris Johnson to agree to the pact. And I believe that's essentially what it is all about. I understand that Nigel Farage doesn't want Brexit, but the people behind the Brexit Party do. And I absolutely do not think that they want to be fielding candidates against Boris Johnson's hardline Brexit position. So that's the situation as I would read it. I think that they're only making these announcements to try and get Boris Johnson to agree to a pact so that you can have a coalition between the Conservatives and the Brexit Party, because for the people behind the Brexit Party, that's the surest way to make sure Boris Johnson behaves himself as Prime Minister in the next Parliament. So anyway, I hope you found the video interesting. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.